Welcome to Design Dialogues, the podcast where we dive deep into the world of UX, design thinking, and everything that shapes the way we interact with products and services. I'm your host, Jaspreet, and today we are exploring a topic that can make or break a company's success. And the topic is user centered design, known as UCD, and organizational culture. So today we have a very special guest with us today, Ajit Kirkole, a seasoned leader in user experience design who has worked with organizations of all sizes to instill this UCD driven mindset. Ajit, welcome to the show. It's really great to have you on our
Thank
podcast
you.
today.
Thanks, Jaspreet. Thanks, Rohit. It's great to be here.
Wonderful. So we'll start with the basics, Ajit. User-centered design or UCD is often associated with UX design teams, but in reality, it's much bigger than that. It's about shaping how organizations function. So we would like you to break it down for us because we wanted to understand what are the biggest benefits of UCD driven culture, what UCD is like for people who are very new to this term, how is it beyond just improving the design for users?
True. Okay. So let me start with like baseline that usually when you talk about organizational culture, it is described as kind of shared values, beliefs, and practices, and that shapes how employees how they behave, how they interact, particularly react because that is more important, and influencing everything from the work habits to customer interaction. It's like a personality of a company, and it's a very powerful phenomena. I think you may have heard the saying that culture eats for breakfast any process or methodology. So that's very powerful, and we all know that culture is also a living evolving thing. And for us as a design community, we usually infer how the organization culture is of a specific company in a specific period or till now, based on the kind of services or products they came out with. So we are able to relate with that. Well-known example is, I think, Apple. So how well they did in terms of UX is our way of looking at how their culture can be, because we cannot be inside them, but we can infer that. But besides being able to design and develop those products which are delightful to the users, there are other benefits which can be observed when you're inside. So what I have seen is that helps building process move faster as a benefit for overall people who are involved. And it is with more autonomy because we are involving all the stakeholders and they are represented in decision making, and we are using our tools to make that happen as a designers. And through user research data and user centric design mindset, we can have a more certain and clear business strategy also. And that benefits our PMs and business analysts. We are working with them to make that happen. So when your product is well known for its experience, it automatically generates a brand value as well, another benefit. And once brand value appreciation happens, it benefits every function in the company because it increases the efficiency of marketing, sales, support. They can just draw on that power and make their work happen. Pride and aspiration is another thing because once you know a certain company is doing such a good work in terms of experience, then people who are already associated feel pride, and people who want to join there have that aspiration that I want to work with that company. So attracting talent that helps HR. So these are the kind of benefits which spawn across different functions in the organizations.
Okay. Um, so should we say, Ajit, that UCD driven organizations, they don't just design for users, they think like users.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So thinking like users for ourselves as well as for others, that is
Mm.
more important.
Mhm. Makes sense. Rohit, anything you would want to add here?
So I'm just curious to know that Ajit, most of the people that we have interviewed so far, they come from startups, and my personal experience also has been in smaller companies. But I do see that you have vast experience working for big companies, and based on what you described, where you mentioned that. Uh, designing processes actually lead to faster outcomes with autonomy. If you think about it if I think about it from a startup standpoint, I find it counterintuitive. I think all those things will slow things down. So I'm very curious to know your perspective on what you said in the context of startups or small companies.
Yeah. So, in terms of startups, or before coming to startup part, let me give an example which I have experienced and I can associate with enterprise class software companies, particularly big company, because there is a very well-known example. In the like that company is Salesforce. So, how did they made happen? Actually, making it happen is not easy. That everybody knows. But as a kind of conviction, once it starts happening, how it can give results, there is a case study. So probably that example can help. So maybe I can move to that part, and during that elaboration, it can make it more clear. So the Salesforce is a kind of CRM platform. So they have like a lot of products built on that, on top of that platform, and it was kind of well established company. So but they faced challenges in 2010, and it was very powerful, but clearly it was not user friendly, but particularly for the non-technical users if they want to use it. So it was driven primarily at that time by sales and executives. So it was based on what they think is needed, and they used to build it. And they had a design team, but it didn't have that much of a power. So primarily the target was what sales has decided, and how they want to kind of portray it. But it resulted into low adoption rates and retention rates also. And then came Mark Benioff, the CEO, in 2010. So he recognized this, and to kind of get to a better growth and customer loyalty, he thought that it needed to basically company needs to undergo a fundamental shift in its organizational culture. Now this is a difficult part. If you compare it with the startup, this is much difficult in enterprise because their number of employees can go into thousands. So they started with that transformation, and first thing they do is they put UX in front and center. So this wasn't just about improving the interface was known to be difficult, but they didn't focus only on that. So they started more of a overhaul, over their process and the way they behave. So to make the power dynamics change, now the decision making power was shared explicitly with UX team. So now they had to, like sales team had to kind of work with UX designers to decide what they are going to do. They took design thinking approach. They invested heavily in hiring the right UX experts and designers, and they organized cross-functional teams to focus on user-centered product development. So yes, the point you made that initially it slows down. Correct. When you start with the transformation, because you are making a big change overall. So it had two aspects of culture change. So first, it fostered that cross-functional collaboration. Engineers, designers, product managers, customer support teams, they came together from that early stage. And the feedback became a primary basis from the customer side, from the user side, for the design process. And the iterations were tested with real users to ensure usability. Externally, Salesforce communicated its focus on user experience in marketing and customer interactions as well. So those teams also followed what is happening from that core team of collaboration, and they emphasize the ease of use and customer success stories based on the user experience. Internally, otherwise the transparency was consciously promoted and increased, and the organization adopted some more inclusive and collaborative communication styles so that everybody knows what's happening, where we are going, and why we are doing it. Then they shared insights and feedbacks more openly. So it wasn't really reserved that if something is not good or something is not been getting better feedback from the users, it was shared more openly. And that started giving the results in faster and more agile development cycles. Why? Because the moment you design something new, if this kind of a culture changes where immediately you get a feedback from the user, then you're not investing more time to make it happen to the fullest. You're stopping it there, you're reiterating. So it becomes more agile, more faster, better decision making. People are more sure about what they're. So this started happening. And effectively, you can say that user experience took precedence over the just raw sales features. And then it became a kind of actually a poster child in the enterprise world, that how more user-friendly CRM platform can perform in a very competitive global market. And if you want to see the numbers, in 2010, the revenue was 1.3 billion, and that it became 10 billion in 2018, and just last year it's 34 billion plus. So the valuation is around 210 billion. So that's a kind of change. So I'm telling you longer duration, but that transformation and that speed of iteration happened within 2 years. So that way, initially, yes, little slow, but once it gets set and driven, then the iterations and kind of churn is much faster.
Fabulous example, Ajit. And I think my takeaway from this conversation is that while initially it seems counterintuitive that we are talking about processes uh, in the context of startup, which is supposed to be move fast, break things, and quickly adapt. But sometimes what can also happen is in doing so, you could be spinning your wheels in so many different directions
True.
without necessarily having a clear structure of what are you learning from all of these moving fast in a predictable manner. So having a
Right.
process that allows you to do this, but also have a clear feedback loop in terms of how you are learning and how you are constantly iterating uh,
Right.
helps. And it doesn't matter whether it is an enterprise or a startup.
Yeah. And another example, maybe little less known example where it didn't work. So RDO was a company. I think they could have been a good competitor for the online music streaming platforms like Spotify. They had a good design also. So UCD was as within the limits of UX design function, it was working fine, but it didn't have that synergy or other wheels you're mentioning working in tandem. So their strategies or the market response or the kind of pricing they wanted to make it happen along with that, unfortunately, didn't work out. And that syncing or synergy, in absence of that, it resulted into not making a really successful outcome out of that. They got acquired, but the valuation or the pricing or the benefit effectively it gave back wasn't that great. So that is something which you can say as an example where if there is a missing synergy or syncing between all the functions are not bought in into the culture of user-centric design, then it may not give that desired result.
Perfect.
We got really good examples from you, Ajit, on basically the successful implementations of UCD driven culture, and as well as where was the flip side. And we could understand that missing synergy in UCD driven culture can actually lead to break things, right? So we will be moving on to the next one, and that is who should be driving a UCD driven culture. It's a very big question, the next big question, and we
True.
would like to understand like who's responsible for driving it. Is it just the design team, or should it be more cross-functional?
Correct, correct. So it's a big question, and actually there is not a you can say a very standard answer to this, because we just saw the example where in Salesforce it was top down from the CEO. So does it always happen from the UX side? No, but naturally it should have a UX driven initiative from our side. If I'm considering ourselves as a designers, so it should have an initiative from the UX team, and how to influence the right people to make that happen is up to us. And that is the way to make that happen. Because if you just consider the numbers, it is going to be always skewed. So number of designers will be very less compared to rest of the functions, most of the rest of the functions. So you need to work on basically you need to work with CEO or technical side, product management side, marketing, corporate communication, HR, because they also need to play their role in that process. And that synergy will help to enable whole organization to actually build and sustain user-centric design-driven culture successfully. So that's how it should happen. If we want to create a maybe a semi-standard process for that, but it is not necessary that this is the only way. It can happen from anywhere. It needs influence. It needs basically the way to get things done.
And Ajit, I think we can have a completely separate podcast on the practicality of making this happen. Because what
Yeah.
I've noticed is while it's easy to say, but so it's easier said than done, because there is a lot of human element involved in this. When the mandate comes from the CEO, everybody is like, oh, okay, it is coming from the
True.
CEO, so we all must collaborate, right?
True.
Otherwise there will be consequences. But if it's like, oh well, we are saying it should be driven by UX, okay, well, this is a UX podcast, so the guests is somebody representing design. But if you go and talk to the tech team, they would probably say, okay, well, we should drive the development of features. And depending on the culture, uh, everybody would have a very different opinion. So
Yeah.
even though the person who has user experience in their title logically is the one who should be driving, but there are so many nuances. How junior or how senior that person is, what are their
Yes.
influencing skills, how tactful are they, how are the other people with whom they are collaborating, and uh, how much are they actually involved? Are they involved at the get-go, or they are basically just given orders saying, okay, design this screen or that screen? So there is a whole lot of practicality of how to make
Right.
it happen. And I think if you listen to speakers, if you read books, if you read articles and whatnot, a lot of people just leave it at that, saying, "Oh, this is UX should drive it." Okay, drive how? And I think that's a big missing element of
Yep.
practicality. And I don't think we will have time to go deep on that one here, but maybe topic for another discussion.
True. I'll just mention one quick thing. So this is purely my personal experience, or you can say my personal take. So we need to drive it and we need to influence it, but just saying it won't happen. We need to take more efforts for that. From my side, basically, you need to, what I think is UX team needs to take more interest in understanding other functions, their terminology, their worries, their concerns, what are their aspirations, and then use your superpower of empathy there. Because uh, I myself went for executive business education at the age of 44, and one of the reason was that I wanted to understand basically those kind of nuances of different functions involved in the business, to know what they do, how they do, what they think, what are their concerns, and that helped me. So that way, it's not possible for everyone to go for the education, but have interest and try to interact to understand them, and use your kind of superpower of empathy to understand the reasons that if they want to go for it, what can be our way of enabling them, or if they don't want to go for it, what can be the reason. So those extra efforts from the UX side is needed, and that has a higher possibility of success of implementing UCD culture.
Well said.
Right. UCD culture is basically a company wide responsibility. And so now we would be moving on to the next one, which is there are some proven ways, some strategies that organizations actually use to implement UCD culture. So can you mention some of those, Ajit?
Yeah. So basically, I just touched upon one of that if you have more interactive team, UX team, where more people are interacting not just for the project or not for their design sprints or like that kind of work collaboration, but more about getting to know about other functions, what are their core values or what are their understanding of business, so they can build more broader perspective. Second thing is having more events for coming together with those other functions where you can do some collaboration, basically hackathon, design hackathon, those kind of activities. And there can be other showcasing events where doing certain conceptual work also based on whatever you have in the business or whatever you have in the technology can trigger that thought process that okay, these non-technical people are thinking in this way, so if we collaborate with them, maybe the outcome can be better. So invite or maybe have those kind of events, but it again goes back to the possibility of enabling from the leadership side to make this happen. If your workload is already high, you may not be able to find that kind of time or effort. But this is the kind of responsibility which comes from the leadership side to enable that possibility.
And I think it's all about the mindset. We should help spreading
Correct.
that mindset across your via workshops or maybe hands-on sessions, design
True.
thinking sessions, right?
Right.
Like we all know that change isn't easy. So wanted to understand what kind of resistance do companies face when they are adopting UCD driven culture, the common
Yeah.
roadblocks.
So yeah, good question. Because see, in the same company, you may not find all types of resistances, but I'll tell you from based on my experiences with the different companies. So usually, typically known resistant types are because lack of awareness. When I started my career, it was like prominent one. Now it is not. Fortunately, that's good. Like most of the companies know about user experience and its value, may not be implementing, but they know, they are aware. And then second thing is siloed departments. So there is lack of collaboration, and that siloed department is again is a result of people are not aware of other departments or what they do. They just try to stay within their comfort zone, and it's not only UX. All the departments are like. Then there can be time and resource constraints, because the phase you are in. If you are a startup, then yeah, you are highly crunched for time and resources. Then difficulty of measuring the ROI of UX investment. That's another thing. All these things somehow probably it is well known, and people have found different ways to deal with that. But for me, at the top, what comes on my observation is the fear of accountability, because the team members, like other team members, they fear that if you really take the user feedback or follow the UCD process and directly work with them, if it doesn't go well, then they'll be held accountable for that, their work. It's not that currently it is not. It is there, that accountability is already there. But this kind of increases their fear that if we completely change the way we are doing, because of these people are telling us that, yeah, this is our user feedback. Now, are you sure? But that's the starting point. That's where you have to enter as a UX expert or as a UX leader, and try to kind of work with them with the empathy to establish that value. And this is the key point. Once you solve that key point, the fear of accountability, that awareness gets resolved, the siloedness of the working gets resolved, then sometimes that enables you to get more time and resources, because once the value is established, then you can ask for the more time or resources. Then you can start measuring the ROIs also, because once you do few projects in this fashion, following the UCD process, then you'll be able to implement those KPIs and get that measurement also.
So I think the big thing is just the awareness of a possibility. So what do I mean by that? So I'll give you a interesting example. And this is not long ago. I think it's been 8 years probably when I encountered this, or maybe less. So uh, somebody within our company, and this guy basically kind of was as a senior UX person who we had hired as a consultant. So I mean, even though he was a consultant, we were paying a hell lot of money to him, and it wasn't like he was
Good
able
to
to
hear
drive.
that.
It wasn't that he was able to drive a lot of impact, and purely the reason was because he was just contracted by the CTO. That's pretty much it. So it wasn't like organization-wide adoption. But interestingly, he held a design thinking workshop. It was a 2-day workshop, and he had that workshop. And in day one, the idea was, okay, well, you all come together, and then we will pick one problem, and then everybody is going to share their viewpoint of the problem, blah blah blah. Right? So it was interesting, right? But that part wasn't necessarily very fascinating to me, because I came from a little bit of product world. So all of these things I kind of understood. So they didn't blow my mind. But after
Mhm.
all this, there was this session where then it was like, oh, okay, now based on whatever you think a solution for this problem could like look like, sketch that out. And then everybody is sketching and whatnot. And then it was like, okay, we will paste these sketches, and then we will vote which one seems to be the best solution, and then we will implement it in a day. I was like, seriously, are you joking? uh, that's not possible at all, right? uh, so all that happened, and then I was like, okay, I want to know how, what do you mean we will implement it in a day? So interestingly, and I didn't know this. So interestingly, what happened was, so we had this designer who also knew a little bit of CSS tweaking. So this person opens up the existing production website, and then he did a few things. So he was able to tweak the CSS a little bit directly on the browser, and then he could show us, oh, okay, if we wanted to design this page, it could look like this. And then that's
Right.
the first time that I heard about that you can even take screens, and then you can make modifications, and you can stitch them together and create a prototype. And before that, I knew
Right.
wireframe, but I didn't know that you could actually do that, where you are just randomly creating screens, putting them in InVision, and then you are creating these clickable prototypes which can demo a
Mm.
concept, right? So
Right.
my point in sharing this is that I think one of the biggest challenges is really just not being aware of these sort of possibilities. Because I didn't know that when he said, okay, well, we will show you that this can be done in a day. First, I didn't know that there was such a thing that you could. Second, I
Right.
had this conceived notion of, what do you mean you will show us how to build it in a day? Because nothing can be built in a day, right? But I didn't know. He simply just meant a clickable prototype, which just demonstrates a concept, not necessarily the whole shebang, right? Uh,
Correct.
so, so that's I think that's basically my point. That just not even knowing what is possible is really the biggest hurdle.
Perfect. Yeah. So that external co-creation hackathons, yes, works wonder. Again, the constraint is to enable that.
Yeah.
Someone needs to kind of take an initiative. So from the leadership side, and yeah, it can be done in small scale also. You need not have the whole company. You can just reach out to a few groups and make it in a smaller scale, but you can externalize is better. So you can show that this is how we did. Maybe create a video, small video, put it on. That will attract more attention. So there are ways to make that happen, even if you may not have that strong support, and then it can generate that support.
Right. So, UCD isn't just a process, and it's a part of company's DNA. Like you have been sharing with all these beautiful examples and also certain examples from Rohit. How do you qualify and measure whether an organization truly has that UCD culture?
Yeah. So there are internal and external sides to it. Internally, you can of course have an strong observation, or you can have an employee voice survey, and basically change measuring the change of the processes, and keeping the tab of where you are going by giving those outputs. So that is one way. But usually for us also as a design community, we like to be seen it measured by external ways, like users, from the user side, the KPIs. Some of them are very well known. You can make use of that. If your company is already measuring that, like your net promoter score or customer satisfaction score, past success rate. So you can use it to UX like UCD advantage to prove that from this point onwards we started doing it in the UCD way, and then this is the change. So you can always claim for that attribution. So, but there are some other KPIs also, little less known, but maybe some people are using it. But I found them kind of more impactful, like churn and attrition rate, because how many users leave or stop using the product, particularly when you want to start your implementation of UCD culture. At that point, you can apply this KPI to understand if something is not working. So you can use that as a data point to your support. Then, if you have a support system, then you can see the churn of ticket volumes after UX, before UX, or in some way. Then you can have user retention rate, like measure how often user comes back to your product, and if it is increased over the period once you started doing the right UCD. Then you can have a bigger thing like customer journey metrics, where you measure where user abandon the key workflow or funnel. So they may not be leaving the product, but they stop using that specific workflow because they find it more cluttery or cumbersome. You can measure that, and then you can put that to a kind of point to be fixed or apply the UCD. So, or feature adoption rate for that purpose, it's the same thing, almost same thing, that how quickly users are able to adopt new feature. So that is a sign of a good user centered approach that got implemented for that product. So these are the kind of KPIs you can make use of it, external facing, because they are more impactful and they could be understood by any function. Because other functions are also worried about that. They also want to make that happen. So you can use these KPIs or use the data and put it along with your user research outcomes, qualitative outcomes, and make it your case that yes, this is where we are. If we do this way, we can go possibly in this better position by applying UCD. So these are the ways to measure and prove what is the value of UCD.
Great, great, Ajit. And this really has been an incredible discussion. And before we wrap up, we would like to have a quick key takeaway from you that you would love the listeners to remember.
Yeah. So basically, I'll like to reiterate the same point. Basically, as a UX team member or as a UX leader, uh, you want to kind of step little out of your comfort zone if you really want to make it happen cross functional, because I have seen the teams they are very well supported from the leadership side, and they are very happy and they're contained within their zone of design, and they do interact with others but not with that interest to kind of really understand their concerns. So the way you are doing it in user research, when you start your session in user research, so first thing user researcher does is to make user comfortable and understand that we are not really evaluating your expertise, we are not really evaluating how well you know the product, we are evaluating our product. We want to understand where it goes wrong. So building that confidence when you are interacting, and that's the power of empathy, that if you use that with while interacting with other functions, it can give you that traction, that acceptance, as well as interest. If you take interest in them, they'll be interested in you, and they'll be more interested to kind of work with you. And once that starts happen, the culture change can be very effective and efficient.
Great, great. So love that key takeaway, Ajit. And I would like to add that UCD is just not about making great products. It's also about creating a culture where users always come first. And thank you so much, Ajit, for joining us today. And to our listeners, if you really enjoyed this conversation, don't forget to share it with your fellow team members. Thank you so much, Ajit. Thank you
Thank
so
you,
much,
Jaspreet.
Rohit.
Thank you.